My daughter-in-law hit me and insisted I hand over my house keys. The slap landed before I could even blink. 1 second I was standing beneath crystal chandeliers, forcing my mouth into a polite smile for my son's sake, and the next my head snapped sideways and my glasses lifted off my face like startled birds. They hit the polished floor with a brittle, delicate sound that felt horribly out of place in a room filled with satin and roses. When I looked down, the lenses were shattered into bright little fragments among scattered petals. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. 130 guests went silent at once. Music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Everything folded into a stunned hush so complete that my own breathing sounded loud. Heat spread across my cheek, but the deeper ache was under my ribs, where something soft and patient seemed to split. She stood over me in white, my son's bride, as if she had always belonged at the center of every room. Her expression wasn't even angry. I was satisfied. "That's what you get for being selfish," she said, voice bright enough to reach every table. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." I crouched for my broken glasses with hands that wouldn't obey me. I could feel eyes on my back like needles. No one stepped forward. Not one cousin, not one friend, not one guest who had smiled at me earlier. Some people stared at their plates. Others turned away with embarrassed little flinches, as if looking at me was the same as approving what had happened. A few leaned together to whisper, like my humiliation was a show included in the wedding package. My son stood beside her. Ethan, my child, my only son, did not move. His gaze stayed fixed on the floor as if he couldn't see me at all. The boy who once cried when he stepped on an ant looked like a man watching a stranger's problem. "You're not welcome here anymore," she continued, smoothing the front of her gown with a careful palm. "Ethan and I need privacy to start our life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." The words were not new. They were just louder than before. For months she had measured my life with the same calculating look. My coat, my shoes, my simple car, the little job I kept because it made my weeks feel real. She spoke to me the way people speak to furniture they intend to replace, with impatience masked as concern. I rose slowly, clutching the bent frame of my glasses. Tears slipped down my face without permission. I heard someone inhale sharply, as if even crying was inconvenient. But inside the tears, something hardened. It wasn't rage at first. It was clear, cold as winter water. "My name is Aurora Hughes. I am 68 years old. I have lived most of my life quietly on purpose. I work 3 days a week in a flower shop because I like the smell of stems and damp soil and the way small kindnesses happen across a counter. I drive a 10-year-old sedan because it starts every morning without drama. I buy clothes on sale because comfort matters more to me than anyone's opinion. To the outside world, and especially to the woman in the white dress, I look like a widow making do. That is the picture I have allowed. That is the picture I have protected." As I walked toward the exit, the whispering followed like smoke. "Poor thing," someone murmured. "She looks so frail." Another voice, a little bolder. "The bride has a point. That's too much space for one old lady. She should be in assisted living," a third added with a tone meant to sound kind. The ballroom doors closed behind me, and the air outside felt colder, cleaner. My cheek still throbbed. My throat still shook. But my steps steadied with each stride, as if my body had finally decided it was done begging for mercy. In the parking lot, under pale lights and long shadows, I reached into my worn black purse. 5 years old not because I couldn't replace it, but because I don't throw away what still works, and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Carlos," I said when he answered. My voice trembled, but it didn't break. "It's Aurora. I need you at the Royal Oaks Ballroom. Now. Bring the documents." There was a pause, the kind that comes from a man who understands exactly what those words mean. "Mrs. Hughes," he said carefully, "are you sure? Once we do this, you can't tuck it back into silence." I looked through the glass at the golden room I'd just left. I could see her laughing at a table, head tilted, surrounded by friends. Ethan stood beside her, smiling faintly like a man trying to survive his own choices. Completely sure, I said. 30 minutes. I hung up and walked to my car. The old sedan welcomed me the way honest things do, without judgment. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and waited, the engine off, the night quiet except for distant music leaking from the building. Time, when you are waiting for a life to split open, moves strangely. Each minute stretches and then snaps. In that space, memories came in sharp flashes. The first time Juliet stepped into my apartment 2 years earlier, she had paused in the doorway and scanned the living room like an appraiser. Her eyes didn't look for warmth or comfort. They looked for value. Her mouth tightened at my second-hand sofa, at the small kitchen, at the worn curtains I'd kept because they still blocked the sun. She had said, "How cozy," and the word had landed like dust. I remembered a family dinner months before the wedding, when she leaned across the table and smiled as if we were sharing a secret. "Aurora, you should think about moving to a smaller place," she had said. "At your age, it must be so hard to maintain all that. And Ethan and I are thinking about kids soon. We'll need more space." Ethan had nodded quickly, eager to agree with whatever kept her pleased. It wasn't that he had always been weak. He had once defended strangers being teased at school. He had once insisted on carrying groceries for an elderly neighbor. Somewhere along the way, he had learned to trade his backbone for peace. Her comments were steady drops of poison. "Don't you have anything more modern to wear? That car is dangerous. Why are you still working?" Each one delivered as a concern, each one meant to make me smaller. I swallowed them the way mothers swallow things, telling myself that patience was love. What she did not know was that I had learned long ago how people behave when they think you have nothing to defend. My late husband, Robert, and I had chosen discretion the way some people choose armor. We had watched money turn friends into thieves and relatives into negotiators. We had decided that the safest fortune is the one no one can count. When Robert was alive, neighbors believed he worked a quiet office job. They saw his modest clothes, our simple dinners, our careful habits. They did not see the businesses he built, the investments he nurtured, the properties he bought and held patiently. They did not see the meetings he attended in plain suits, the deals he made that required no applause. When he died, people brought casseroles and murmured about getting by. I thanked them and let them believe it, because we had learned, painfully, that visible wealth attracts attention, and attention attracts trouble. In the car, I pulled my phone out again and called my neighbor Joseph. He was in his 70s, the kind of man who watered his plants like it was prayer, and he had become family after Robert passed. "Joseph," I said, "I need a favor. Go to my desk. Second drawer. There's a brown folder. Bring it to me." He didn't ask why. He never did. "I'm on my way," he said, and that steady loyalty was the first kindness I'd felt all night. While I waited, another memory surfaced, one that still made my stomach clench. A year ago, while Ethan was in my bathroom, I had heard Juliet speaking softly on the phone in my kitchen, assuming walls were loyal. "Yes, Mom," she had whispered. "His mother's place is in a super expensive area. If I can get her to move, we can stay there while we look for something better. She's so naive she'll probably thank us for helping her transition." I had stood in the hallway with a dish towel in my hands and felt something inside me go still. I didn't confront her. I didn't burst in. I simply filed it away. From that moment, every conversation became a performance. She acted concerned. I acted pliable. She pushed. I watched. After they announced their engagement, the pressure sharpened into routine. She arrived with glossy brochures for senior living communities, spreading them across my coffee table like my home was already sold. Ethan repeated her lines like a script. "It would be safer, Mom. You'd have activities. You wouldn't be alone." Each sentence sounded like love until you noticed where it always ended. My keys. I did my own homework. Quietly, I asked an old friend to look into their finances. What came back was uglier than I expected. Debt stacked like unstable bricks, credit cards stretched thin, late rent, payments they couldn't carry. Their glittering lifestyle wasn't prosperity. It was a mask held up by borrowed air. And my apartment, in a building they could never afford on their best day, was their escape hatch. Then came the ambush, a week before the wedding. Juliet arrived with Ethan and her parents. Her mother sat stiffly in my chair as if it belonged to her. Her father looked around my living room the way a buyer looks around a house he expects to own. Ethan sat between them, silent, hands folded like a boy in trouble. At your age, her mother said, it's irresponsible to live alone in such a big place. What if you have an emergency? Her father added, nodding as if concern gave him authority. Ethan finally spoke. They're right, Mom. Juliet, and I think it's time you make a change. I looked at all of them and understood what that meeting truly was. Coordinated pressure, words polished in advance, concern weaponized. When I asked directly whether they wanted the apartment, the silence answered me. After that silence, her father mentioned numbers, explaining a facility that would cost thousands each month. He suggested selling my home could fund it for years, with money left over to help the young couple with their start. And then came the hint, cold and careful, that if I refused they might be forced to consider other options, like legal evaluations. My son did not protest. He only stared at his hands. That night I cried, not because I felt helpless, but because I realized the version of my son I loved had been replaced by someone who could sit beside a threat and call it family planning. The next morning, I called Carlos. He had managed my affairs since Robert's passing, a man who spoke gently but prepared ruthlessly. I asked him to investigate everything. Debts, loans, inquiries. The report he brought back was precise and heartbreaking. They were drowning, yes. But worse, Ethan had been calling institutions asking about loans against his mother's property. He had asked about power of attorney. He had asked quietly what it takes to have a parent declared unable to manage her own affairs. So when the slap happened in front of a room full of witnesses, it wasn't a random flare of emotion. It was the moment her mask slipped completely. It was the moment her patience ran out and cruelty showed its face. And it was the moment my own patience turned into something else. Joseph arrived in the parking lot 10 minutes later, breathless, the brown folder clutched in both hands. His eyes darted to my cheek and then away, furious on my behalf. Aurora, he said. What happened? I told him in a few sentences. His jaw tightened. That woman is poison, he muttered, and the anger in his voice made me feel less alone. He handed me the folder, and I opened it under the harsh light. Deeds, statements, titles. Quiet proof of a life no one in that ballroom had guessed. An investment account balance that would make Juliet's face go blank. Papers for properties Robert and I held not for vanity, but because Robert believed in foundations that could not be shaken by other people's opinions. Records of trusts and holdings, the kind of paperwork that looks boring until it changes the air in a room. And there were records of something else too, proof of my own foolish kindness. Month after month, I had sent money to keep Ethan afloat without letting his pride know it. Rent assistance, disguised as a landlord discount. Credit card payments he believed were bonuses. Bills that never landed on his table because I intercepted them and paid quietly. For 3 years, I had been the net beneath him. I told myself it was love. I refused to admit it was fear. Fear of watching him fall. My hands steadied on the folder's edge. Love without limits had taught him there were none. Headlights swept across the lot. A dark sedan rolled in and parked near mine. Carlos stepped out with a briefcase under his arm, his coat buttoned, his expression serious in the way only professionals can be when emotion is a luxury. Mrs. Hughes, he said, and in his tone was the same question he'd asked on the phone. Are you sure? I looked toward the ballroom again. Music pulsed behind the walls. Somewhere inside, they were still celebrating, still believing they had won, still believing I would crawl back apologizing for existing. I lifted my chin. Yes, I said. We're going in. Carlos opened his briefcase on the hood of his car and laid out documents with practiced precision. Notices, cancellations, letters that would turn off the flow of money as cleanly as closing a valve. My name was printed in crisp ink above lines where my signature would land. Each page felt like cutting a thread I had spun with my own hands. He spoke quietly as I read. This revokes the lease guarantee. This stops the transfers. This withdraws the remaining payment for the venue. His voice stayed calm, but even he understood the scale of it. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a shift in reality. I signed. Once, twice, again. My pen moved like it had been waiting years to do this. When I finished, Carlos gathered the papers and met my eyes. "All right," he said softly. "Let's deliver them." We walked back toward the doors. My cheek still ached, but my heart no longer felt like it was collapsing. It felt, strangely, like it was returning to its proper place in my chest. Inside, the music cut off the moment we stepped onto the polished floor. 130 faces turned toward us. The air changed. Even people who had been laughing seconds earlier seemed to sense the temperature drop. Juliet noticed me first. Her smile sharpened. "What are you doing back?" she called, loud enough for the whole room. "Didn't you get enough drama for one night?" Ethan's head lifted, confusion crossing his face like a shadow. He saw Carlos's briefcase. He saw the papers. And a crack opened in whatever certainty he'd been clinging to. Carlos spoke before I did, his voice carrying with professional ease. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, "but I have urgent legal and financial matters to deliver to Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Hughes." A hush fell, thicker than before. People leaned forward. Phones appeared, screens glowing. Ethan took a step toward me, pale now, his mouth slightly open. "Mom," he said, and the words sounded unsure for the first time in months. "What is this?" I held his gaze. "The truth," I said. And as Carlos opened the folder and prepared to read, the celebration that had fed on my humiliation took its first breath of regret. Carlos's voice carried through the ballroom with a steadiness that felt almost surgical. He didn't raise his tone, didn't dramatize a single word, yet every syllable seemed to land heavier than the music that had been playing moments earlier. The room leaned toward him instinctively, as if people sensed that whatever came next would redraw the evening they thought they were attending. "Mr. Ethan Hughes," Carlos began, unfolding the first document, "you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother has privately provided for your current lease agreement has been revoked, effective immediately." Ethan blinked. Once. Twice. The words didn't register at first, like a language he had never learned. "Guarantee?" he asked weakly. "What guarantee?" Juliet laughed sharply, a brittle sound that didn't match the room. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "My husband doesn't need a guarantee. We pay our own rent." Carlos did not look at her. He addressed Ethan directly. "Your landlord will be informed tomorrow morning. You will have 30 days to provide an alternative guarantor or vacate the property." The color drained from Ethan's face so fast it was almost frightening. His eyes flicked to me, searching, then away again, as if looking at me too long might make the truth undeniable. "Mom," he whispered, "what is he talking about?" I met his gaze calmly. "He's talking about the reason you haven't been evicted for the last year." A ripple passed through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered an oath under their breath. Juliet stepped forward, her bouquet slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor without her noticing. "That's a lie," she said, pointing at me. "She's trying to embarrass us. Look at her. She works in a flower shop. She drives that ancient car. She can barely take care of herself." Carlos turned another page. "Additionally," he continued, "the monthly transfers of $4,500 that Mrs. Hughes has been making to accounts associated with Mr. Ethan Hughes have been permanently suspended." The silence shattered into murmurs. People turned toward one another, calculating, recalculating. Some faces showed shock. Others showed the faint satisfaction of spectators who had just been given confirmation that their curiosity would be rewarded. Juliet's mouth opened and closed. "Transfers," she echoed. "What transfers?" Ethan swayed slightly, as if the floor beneath him had shifted. "Mom," he said again, his voice cracking now. "What transfers?" "For 3 years," I said quietly. "I paid your rent. I covered your credit cards. I paid your car insurance. Every bonus you thanked your boss for was money I sent because I didn't want to watch you drown." His knees bent, just a little. If Juliet hadn't grabbed his arm, he might have fallen. Her face twisted, fury fighting panic. "You're insane," she hissed at me. "You're making this up because you're bitter." Carlos didn't give her space to regain control. "Finally," he said, lifting the last document, "the financial guarantee for this event has also been withdrawn. The management of the venue has been notified." That did it. The room erupted. Guests began speaking all at once, chairs scraping, glasses rattling. A woman near the back stood up abruptly, clutching her purse as if afraid someone might ask her to contribute. Another guest laughed nervously, convinced this had to be some kind of elaborate joke. Juliet's parents shot to their feet. Her mother's face had gone chalk white. "What do you mean withdrawn?" she demanded. "This wedding is paid for." Carlos's eyes were cool. "It was paid for by Mrs. Hughes. Privately. That payment has been cancelled." Juliet screamed then. There was no other word for it. The sound tore through the ballroom, raw and animal. "You can't do this," she shrieked, turning on me. "You're ruining our wedding. You're destroying our lives." I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on my face, waiting for tears, for hysteria, for regret. What they saw instead surprised even me. "No," I said. "I am stopping." Ethan stumbled toward me, his tie crooked now, sweat shining on his forehead. "Mom, please," he begged. "Whatever this is, we can fix it later. There are people here. This is humiliating." I looked at him for a long moment, really looked. At the man who had watched his wife strike me and said nothing. At the man who had planned to take my home and call it concern. "Humiliating?" I asked softly. "Is that what you call what happened to me an hour ago?" His mouth trembled. He had no answer. Carlos cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hughes has also instructed me to inform you," he continued, "that her estate plans have been amended." Juliet froze. "All assets previously designated for inheritance by Mr. Ethan Hughes have been redirected," Carlos said, "to charitable organizations dedicated to protecting seniors from financial and emotional abuse." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Juliet staggered back as if struck. Her father cursed under his breath. Her mother clutched the edge of the table to steady herself. "You can't do that," Juliet screamed. "He's your son." "I can," I replied. "And I have." Ethan stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "You're disowning me," he whispered. "I am choosing myself," I said. The ballroom manager appeared then, his face tight with professional alarm. He held a clipboard like a shield. "Mrs. Hughes," he said carefully, "we've received notice of a payment issue. The outstanding balance for this event is $53,000. We need immediate clarification." Juliet spun toward him. "This is a misunderstanding," she snapped. "Fix it." The manager looked from her to Ethan, then back to me. "Who will be responsible for payment?" I stepped forward. "Not me." The manager exhaled slowly. "Then I will need an alternative form of payment immediately," he said, "or we will have to suspend the event." A wave of panic swept the room. Guests began edging toward the exits. Someone whispered, "I'm not paying for this." Another muttered, "I knew something was off." Juliet turned back to me, desperation etched into every line of her face. "Please," she said, her voice suddenly smaller. "Think of Ethan. Think of your grandchild." "I am," I replied. I'm thinking of the lesson you refused to learn. Ethan dropped to his knees. The sound of it echoed louder than the slap had earlier. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Juliet shrieked his name, tugging at his arm, but he stayed there, hands pressed to the floor, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I looked down at him, my heart aching in a way that felt ancient. You knew, I said gently. You just didn't want to. Carlos stepped closer to me. Mrs. Hughes, he said quietly, everything has been delivered. There is nothing more to do here. Lucy's voice cut through the noise. Aunt Aurora, wait. She rushed toward me from the back of the room, tears streaking her face. She wrapped her arms around me without hesitation, holding on as if afraid I might disappear. I didn't know, she whispered fiercely. I swear I didn't know. I know, I said, stroking her hair. You would have stopped it. The ballroom manager raised his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, if payment is not resolved immediately, we will need everyone to vacate the premises. Chaos followed. Chairs scraped, voices rose, guests grabbed coats and gifts, the illusion of celebration collapsing into something frantic and ugly. Juliet's parents argued with the manager. Juliet herself sobbed uncontrollably, her makeup streaked, her dress rumpled and heavy with the weight of what she had lost. Ethan remained on the floor, staring at nothing. I turned away. As Carlos and I walked toward the exit, the sound behind us fractured into shouting and crying and angry demands. None of it touched me anymore. I felt hollow, but steady, like a house after a storm has stripped away what was never meant to last. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool and merciful. I inhaled deeply for the first time all evening. It's done, Carlos said quietly. Yes, I replied. Now it can begin. We walked into the darkness together, leaving behind a ballroom full of consequences, and a life that had finally, irrevocably split into before and after. 3 days passed after the wedding, and with each sunrise the silence in my apartment felt heavier and cleaner at the same time. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm has stripped the air of dust. Pain still lived there, but it no longer screamed. It waited, patient and manageable. Joseph came every morning without fail, carrying coffee and something warm wrapped in paper. He never asked questions unless I offered answers. We sat at my small kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the worn wood, and he would talk about ordinary things. Weather, the building, a stubborn plant that refused to bloom. His normalcy was a kindness more profound than any speech. The phone, on the other hand, refused to be quiet. Ethan called again and again. At first, his messages were furious, accusing me of betrayal, of cruelty, of destroying his life. By the second day, anger turned to panic. By the third, his voice was small and broken, pleading for help, for explanation, for mercy. Juliet sent messages too, long, frantic paragraphs alternating between threats and apologies. Her parents showed up twice, pounding on my door, demanding I fix what I caused. I did not open it. Carlos arrived on the third morning with his briefcase and a look that told me everything before he spoke. Mrs. Hughes, he said gently as we sat on the balcony, the fallout has begun. I nodded. I had expected nothing less. They were evicted yesterday morning, he continued. The landlord moved quickly once the guarantee was withdrawn. The venue has initiated legal action to recover the outstanding balance. Credit cards have been frozen. Accounts are overdrawn. And where are they now? I asked. With Juliet's parents, Carlos replied. 3 adults in a 2-bedroom apartment. It's unstable. I looked out over the city, at the rooftops glowing in early light. They made choices, I said. Now they're living with them. That afternoon, Lucy arrived unannounced. She didn't come alone. Amelia, my old friend from real estate, stood beside her, and behind them was Joseph, his expression unusually tense. Aurora, Lucy said as soon as she stepped inside. We need to talk. They sat together in my living room, close enough that their knees almost touched. Lucy held a folder, thick and organized, the way serious trouble often is. I started asking questions after the wedding, she said. I couldn't let it go. What I found. It's worse than we thought. Amelia opened the folder and slid documents across the table. Juliet consulted attorneys over a year ago, she said quietly. Specialists in mental competency cases involving seniors. The words settled slowly, like ash. They had a plan, Lucy continued, her hands shaking. A full one. Witness statements, medical evaluations, neighbor reports. They were preparing to declare you incompetent. Joseph leaned forward. And there's more, he added. After the wedding, I overheard Juliet on the phone. She said you'd ruined everything, but that they still had Plan B. Plan B. The phrase lodged in my chest. What does that mean? I asked. Lucy swallowed. They've been telling people you've gone senile. That your behavior at the wedding proves you're unstable. The anger that rose in me was colder than anything I'd felt before. They're building a case, I said. Yes, Amelia confirmed. They're trying to turn your self-defense into evidence. Carlos arrived mid-conversation, his face grim. Ethan filed a preliminary petition yesterday, he said, requesting a court-ordered mental evaluation. I closed my eyes briefly. The betrayal had layers I hadn't imagined. It wasn't enough to humiliate me, to threaten my home, to strip me financially. They wanted my autonomy, my voice, my credibility. Lucy took my hand. We're not letting this happen, she said fiercely. Joseph pulled out his phone. You're not alone, he added, turning the screen toward me. On it was a video, grainy, handheld, unmistakable. Juliet's slap. My stumble. Carlos's calm voice. My words, steady and clear. It's gone viral, Joseph said. Millions of views. I watched silently as comments scrolled beneath it. Messages of outrage, support, recognition. Strangers calling my response dignified. Seniors sharing their own stories of manipulation and loss. Young people promising to protect their parents better. Carlos nodded. Public perception is overwhelmingly in your favor. That matters. Something inside me clicked into place. Fear gave way to resolve. If they want war, I said, opening my desk drawer and pulling out my own folder, they'll have it. But on my terms. Inside were photographs of my bruised cheek, medical records, notes documenting every visit, every pressure, every threat. I had learned quickly. Silence protects abusers. Documentation protects victims. I've contacted elder abuse attorneys, I continued. I'm not hiding anymore. Lucy smiled through tears. Good. The legal battle unfolded faster than I expected. Ethan's petition collapsed under scrutiny. Evidence of coercion, of financial exploitation, of premeditation stacked too high to ignore. The court dismissed the case and fined them for legal frivolity. They were ordered to pay my legal fees. The bankruptcy followed swiftly. 6 months later, I sat backstage in a television studio, lights buzzing softly overhead. The program had reached out after the videos surpassed 2 million views. My story had become something larger than me, a mirror held up to families who preferred not to look too closely. Carlos sat beside me, calm as ever. In the audience, Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia waited, their presence grounding me. 5 minutes, the producer said. I thought of Ethan then, not the man he had become, but the boy he had been. I wondered if he would watch. The interview began smoothly. The host asked thoughtful questions, giving me space to explain how abuse grows quietly, disguised as concern. I spoke of boundaries, of dignity, of the danger of confusing love with sacrifice. When she asked what finally pushed me to reveal the truth, I answered honestly. The slap, I said. Because it showed me that silence was no longer protecting anyone. At the end, she asked if I had a message for my son. I looked into the camera. I love you, I said simply. But love does not mean surrendering your dignity. The door is open, but only to respect. When the cameras shut off, applause filled the studio. I felt lighter than I had in years. Life did not magically repair itself after that night. It reshaped itself. 2 years passed. I founded a foundation to protect seniors from family abuse. We helped hundreds reclaim their homes, their savings, their confidence. Joseph became my vice president. Lucy moved next door and found a purpose she'd never known. Amelia remained my anchor. Ethan called 3 times in those 2 years. Each time he asked for money. Each time he did not apologize. Juliet left him eventually, taking their child. I created a trust for my grandson's education, quietly, without conditions. Love does not require proximity. My health improved. My sleep deepened. My posture straightened. Stress had been aging me faster than time ever could. The apartment that once felt like a battleground became a sanctuary again. I filled it with plants, with laughter, with letters from people who said my story saved them. At 70, my life is fuller than it was at 68. I learned that dignity is not something you defend once. It is something you choose again and again. And I learned that sometimes, the bravest act of love is walking away, so you can finally stand upright. The months after the television interview unfolded with a rhythm I had never known before. My days were no longer shaped by anxiety or anticipation of the next confrontation. Instead, they filled with purpose, quiet at first, then steadily louder, until my calendar became something I recognized as my own. Letters began arriving within a week of the broadcast. At first there were a handful, then dozens, then so many that I needed an extra basket by the door. They came from women and men in their 60s, 70s, even 80s. Some were neatly handwritten, others typed with shaky margins, others scrawled as if the writer had been afraid to lose courage before finishing. They all said variations of the same thing. This is my life. I thought I was alone. Thank you for speaking. I read every one. Some letters told stories that made my chest ache. A retired teacher whose son convinced her to co-sign loans until her pension disappeared. A widower whose daughter moved in to help and slowly took over his bank accounts. A grandmother threatened with never seeing her grandchildren again if she didn't sell her house. The details changed, but the pattern was unmistakable. Love used as leverage. Concern twisted into control. Silence mistaken for safety. It became impossible to read those letters and do nothing. Carlos and I sat at my kitchen table one morning, papers spread between us, the window open to let in the scent of rain. You know, he said carefully, you have the resources to create something real. Not just legal defense. Education. Prevention. I nodded. The idea had been forming in my mind for weeks. A foundation, I said. One that doesn't just fix damage, but teaches people how to recognize it before it destroys them. The Aurora Hughes Foundation was born quietly, without ceremonies or announcements. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted effectiveness. We assembled a small team at first. Lawyers who specialized in elder law, social workers who understood the emotional labyrinth victims navigate, psychologists who could name what many people feel but cannot articulate. We rented a modest office, painted the walls a warm neutral color, and opened our doors. The first case arrived within days. She was 72, thin as a shadow, hands folded tightly in her lap as if holding herself together required effort. Her daughter had sold her car without permission to pay off gambling debts. When she discovered it, she was told she was confused, that she must have agreed and forgotten. She had started to believe it. We helped her recover the money. More importantly, we helped her believe in herself again. Word spread faster than I expected. Seniors told other seniors. Churches called. Community centers invited us to speak. Within 6 months, we had helped more than 100 people reclaim something. Sometimes property, sometimes savings, sometimes just confidence. Joseph surprised me most during that time. The man who once spent his days tending plants and reading quietly now stood in front of rooms full of people, explaining manipulation patterns with the precision of a detective. They don't start by stealing, he would say. They start by convincing you that you need them. Watching him speak, watching his shoulders straighten, I realized that dignity is contagious. Lucy became indispensable. After her divorce, a marriage she later admitted she had entered out of fear of being alone, she moved into the apartment next door. She brought laughter back into the hallway. As the Foundation's educational director, she designed workshops that translated legal language into human language. She had a gift for explaining complicated ideas without making anyone feel small. "Aunt Aurora," she told me one evening as we cooked together, "you didn't just change your life. You changed mine." The book came next, almost against my will. An investigative journalist approached me with a proposal to document my story alongside others. I hesitated. Privacy had always been my shield. But when I thought of the letters, of the people who still didn't have words for what was happening to them, I agreed. Writing was harder than I expected. It required revisiting moments I would have preferred to leave behind. But it also revealed patterns I hadn't seen while living through them. Abuse rarely announces itself. It whispers. It wears familiar faces. It arrives disguised as help. When the book was published, I expected modest interest. Instead, it became a bestseller within weeks. I redirected every cent of royalties to the Foundation. Money had already taken enough from families. I would not let it take a purpose too. With visibility came backlash. There were emails accusing me of exaggeration, of destroying families, of encouraging rebellion. Some were anonymous. Others signed with righteous certainty. I read them once, then let them go. I had learned the difference between criticism and control. One challenges you. The other tries to silence you. Ethan contacted me 6 months after the interview. His voice on the phone sounded older, rougher. "Mom," he said, "people at work saw the show. They treat me like I'm a monster." I closed my eyes. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" There was a pause. "I need help." "With what?" I asked. "Money," he said. There it was. The unchanged core. "I can't do that," I replied calmly. "You're choosing pride over your own son," he snapped. "No," I said. "I'm choosing truth over enabling." He hung up on me. For the first time in my life, I let the silence remain. Juliet tried too, later. Her messages shifted tone as months passed. At first, she threatened legal action. Then she begged. Then she invoked my unborn grandchild. "You wouldn't let a baby suffer," she wrote. I cried that night. I won't pretend otherwise. The thought of a child growing up amid resentment cut deep. After long consideration, I created a trust fund for my grandchild's education, administered independently. No conditions. No access. Love without leverage. When Juliet discovered this, her messages stopped. The Foundation grew. We opened regional centers. Universities invited me to speak. Legislators requested meetings. I found myself sitting across from people who made laws, explaining how easily those laws could be manipulated against the very people they were meant to protect. "It's not enough to assume families act in good faith," I told them. "We must protect autonomy, even, and especially, within blood ties." Some listened. Some resisted. But change, like healing, is incremental. 2 years after the wedding, I sat again on my balcony, watching the city shift from afternoon to evening. My body felt different now. Lighter. My doctor said stress had been aging me faster than time ever could. Without it, my blood pressure normalized. My sleep deepened. Even my posture changed. I still missed Ethan. Or rather, I missed the son I believed he was. Grief doesn't disappear just because you choose dignity. It simply transforms. He called again when his son was born. His voice shook as he told me the name. Oliver. I wrote it down and whispered it later, alone. Welcome, I said to the empty room. 3 months later, Juliet left him. Took the baby. Took what little they had left. When Ethan called after that, his voice was hollow. She ruined my life, he said. No, I replied softly. She revealed it. That conversation ended quietly. No shouting. No pleading. Just the truth laid bare between us like a table we both refused to set. The foundation surpassed 400 cases. Properties recovered. Savings restored. But the most powerful victories were invisible. People who walked in hunched and afraid left standing taller. People who doubted their own minds learned to trust themselves again. One afternoon, a woman named Margaret hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. You taught me that boundaries aren't cruel, she said. They're surviving. She was right. I no longer apologize for my boundaries. I no longer confuse sacrifice with love. I no longer shrink to make others comfortable. At 70, my life is full. Not perfect. Not painless. But honestly, I have learned that sometimes the most radical act is not revenge, but refusal. The refusal to continue being used, silenced, diminished. And I have learned that dignity, once reclaimed, becomes something no one can ever take from you again. Part 5. 2 years after the night that split my life cleanly into before and after, I found myself awake before dawn more often than not. It wasn't insomnia anymore. It was anticipation. The quiet hours had become a space where my thoughts moved freely, unburdened by fear. I would sit on the balcony with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the city wake, and feel something I hadn't felt in years, ownership of my own breath. The foundation had become a living organism by then, expanding in ways I hadn't planned but somehow understood. Each new regional office carried its own rhythm, shaped by the community it served. Rural areas brought different stories than cities, but the core was the same. Adults who had spent their lives being dependable, suddenly told they were unreliable. Parents who had raised children with care, now treated as obstacles. Elders who had been convinced that love meant surrender. On Monday mornings, Carmen, our national coordinator, called with updates. Her voice always held that same mix of determination and sadness. We have 23 new cases this week, she said once. All familiar patterns. I knew what she meant without her having to explain. There were patterns you begin to recognize when you've lived them yourself. Pressure disguised as concern. Repetition designed to wear down resistance. Isolation masked as protection. By the time a person realizes what is happening, their confidence is already fractured. Some mornings I reviewed case files. Other days I visited seniors in their homes, sitting at kitchen tables that smelled like tea and memories. I listened more than I spoke. I learned that most people didn't want revenge. They wanted validation. They wanted someone to say, "You are not imagining this." Joseph often joined me on those visits. He had become remarkably adept at asking gentle questions that led people to their own conclusions. "When did you start feeling afraid to say no?" he would ask. The answer was always revealing. Lucy's work focused on prevention. She created workshops for families, not just seniors, because abuse rarely thrives in light. Watching her teach was watching purpose take form. She had a way of connecting with people across generations, translating hard truths without bitterness. Respect isn't automatic, she would say. It's practiced. The success of the foundation brought opportunities one had never imagined. Universities invited me to lecture. Conferences asked me to speak. I declined some. I accepted others. I learned to choose where my energy went, a skill I had once lacked entirely. My second book progressed slowly, intentionally. This one was not about my story, but about tools, how to recognize manipulation early, how to document concerns, how to seek help without shame. I wrote it at my own pace, often pausing to walk in the community garden I had helped establish in the building. Digging my hands into soil grounded me. It reminded me that growth is rarely immediate, but it is always possible. The garden had become a gathering place. Neighbors shared seeds, advice, stories. I taught medicinal plants and listened to tales of lives lived quietly and fully. Wisdom flourishes when it is invited. Ethan remained the one unresolved ache. I would be dishonest if I claimed otherwise. Grief does not evaporate simply because you choose dignity. It lingers, reshaped. I missed the boy he had been, the child who used to bring me dandelions because he thought they were flowers. I did not miss the man who tried to take my autonomy. He contacted me exactly 3 times in those 2 years. Each call followed the same pattern. He spoke of hardship, of unfairness, of how the world had turned against him. Each time, when I asked if he understood why, the conversation faltered. The 3rd call ended differently. "Mom," he said, his voice tired, "your pride is more important than your grandson." The words landed heavily, but they did not break me. "My dignity," I replied calmly, "is exactly as important as my grandson. And I hope one day he learns that lesson better than you did." I hung up, hands steady. It was the first time I had ever ended a conversation with my son by choice. The grief that followed was real, but so was the relief. Oliver, my grandson, existed in my life only as an idea and a name. I had never held him. I had never smelled his hair or heard his laugh. I mourned that quietly, in private moments. But I refused to allow that grief to become leverage. The trust one had established for him would remain untouched until adulthood. Love without control. Care without strings. Juliet disappeared from my life entirely after she left Ethan. Her absence was a relief I did not analyze too deeply. Some chapters close without ceremony. My health continued to improve in ways that surprised my doctor. "Stress is an invisible illness," he told me once. "Remove it, and the body remembers how to heal." I believed him. I stood taller now. I laughed more easily. My voice no longer shook when I set boundaries. The apartment that had once been coveted like a prize now felt like a sanctuary. I transformed Ethan's old room into an office. The walls are filled with letters, photos, certificates, not trophies, but reminders. Proof that pain can be repurposed. One afternoon, as I organized files, I found the broken frame of my glasses wrapped carefully in tissue at the back of a drawer. I had kept them without realizing why. I held them for a long moment, then placed them gently into a memory box. Not as a wound, but as a marker. A reminder of the exact moment I stopped shrinking. The foundation celebrated its 2nd anniversary quietly. No gala. No speeches. We spent the day reviewing outcomes, refining processes, and sharing stories of success. Someone brought cake. Joseph made a joke about becoming a bureaucrat in his 70s. Lucy rolled her eyes affectionately. That evening, alone on the balcony, I reflected on how different my life looked at 70 compared to 68. I had more responsibility, more visibility, more purpose, but less fear. The trade felt fair. People often ask me if I regret what I did that night. If I wish I had handled it differently. The question is always loaded with the hope that I will soften the edges, make it more comfortable for others. I do not regret reclaiming my dignity. I regret only how long I believed silence was love. Tomorrow, I will meet with lawmakers to discuss new protections for seniors. Next week, I will inaugurate another regional center. Next month, a documentary series will begin production. My life, at an age society often labels as declining, was expanding. I had learned that endings are not failures. They are thresholds. Standing up for myself did not make me cruel. It made me honest. Walking away from those who hurt me did not make me heartless. It made me whole. And as the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the city in gold and shadow, I knew with certainty that my story had not ended in a ballroom under chandeliers and broken glass. It had begun there, but it had carried me somewhere far richer. Peace, I discovered, is not passive. It is chosen. And once chosen, it changes everything.